Soon afterward, arcade machines started to populate within nearly every retail store. At that time, kids were being drawn to these arcades like magnets due to the challenging arenas, flashing lights, and by the sound of electronic explosions and music. I remember my first experience vividly. One day I visited Jeff, and he told me that the store had just installed a new game machine. As I followed him to the corner store, I wondered what he was talking about. Suddenly, as I directed my eyes to the storefront, I was witnessing history in the making. Games were going to change the world. The store owner had managed to get a contract with the arcade vendor, and in that moment in time, I was introduced to Pac-Man. I observed my friend as he dropped quarters into a small slot on this massive console. Soon, the screen was illuminated and a musical fanfare played. He began playing the game. There was also a handheld controller attached to a joystick that was embedded on the machine. Suddenly, colorful ghosts began chasing after Pac-Man. My eyes enlarged as I saw this amazing revolution animating behind an enclosed glass screen. Much later, other small game consoles began to flood the market that mirrored after the arcade machines. My friend Jeff had just purchased a new one, and the game was called Donkey Kong. He demonstrated it to me one day when I dropped by for a visit. I was in awestruck wonder at this game, since it had better graphics than the Atari 2600 and was miniaturized on an even smaller display. It also mimicked the arcade machines that were common in that era, and the player controlled the game characters with joystick controllers attached to the machine. Donkey Kong became a legend. Like its predecessor, Pac-Man, Donkey Kong quickly became a favorite present to find stashed under the Christmas tree. The Apple IIe computer was originally released into production in 1981, but I didn't witness this until 1984. When I was in my 8th grade history class, the teacher had advised the class of a history assignment that was due the next day. Since I was the only participant, I was free to leave for the day. I didn't have transportation home yet because the buses picked up students within an hour, so I decided to visit the library. I clearly recall walking in the library and staring at the Apple IIe computer sitting toward the center. My future was suddenly becoming crystal clear. At that time, one of the library staff members showed me how to use the computer and demonstrated how to load programs onto a floppy disk, but I was too distracted by the sight of this amazing machine to comprehend that. My mind filtered out her words until she stated, "Okay, the program will run now." My program selection suddenly produced a very nice graphical picture onto the colorful display. It was almost like a cartoon, but different, since I could control the screens by sending navigational commands to the console, such as go east or go west. This was too cool. The next year in high school, I learned about a newer computer called the Macintosh. We often spent our English course in the lab designated for this computer. It came packaged with a monitor embedded with a disk drive. Many writing assignments were produced using this new system by the students. During my lunchtime, I visited the library, however, since they also had an Apple IIe accessible to the students. It was during that time I began to acquire a hunger beyond any teenager fantasy that had nothing to do with girls. My love was a box that littered the screen with amazing graphics and beeping sounds deep within. It was at that time when I began obsessing over owning my own computer. Yet I didn't have a job beyond a lawn mowing service I inherited from my older brother. So, I set a budget that enabled me to save up for my own personal computer. In those days, a computer could easily be over $200. It was also during that time I began writing a journal to keep track of the money I was accumulating from many pampered lawns. This was a great goal, since I would learn to become more economical over time. When I had finally managed to save up enough money the next year, I began exploring newspapers to see if there was an affordable computer somewhere. My brother was interested in my logic and helped me scan newspapers for any sales occurring in the retail outlets. One day, my neighbor Nicholas came for a visit and told me excitedly that he knew where I could purchase a cool, cheap computer. It was a toy store called Children's Palace. His mother was even willing to chauffeur us to the store. It was also the first time I ever stepped into a magical fantasy land of computers in every direction. Soon after, I tendered $99 to finally own my first personal computer in the Christmas season of 1986. It was the Atari 65XE. This was the moment I had waited over 2 years for. At last, I can begin learning about this incredible machine. I studied the owner's manual for a short time, learning about the component parts of my system. After getting comfortable with the keys, I turned to a chapter on basic programming. The programs were simple and taught concepts at an elementary level. However, I didn't care. My destination was suddenly evident as I began to enter the strange commands into my Atari. My typing wasn't the best, but eventually I typed the run command and watched my program spring to life. It printed, "Hello, Steve." Eureka! At first, I had no recording device and actually wrote down programs by hand for the longest time. Eventually, I decided to start saving for a media storage device. I had my sights set on a program recorder. However, at the time, I totally misunderstood what was going to work for me. I received a tape recorder from my dad in those days and set about trying to get a cable for that tape recorder. Much later, I realized my error after I finally purchased the Atari 1010 cassette recorder. It was only then that I realized the difference between a computer recorder and a tape recorder. In the spring of 1988, I went to work at an Italian restaurant making pizzas. It was my first job. During that time, I befriended a coworker there named Steven. One day, while we were filling some pizza dough with sauce, I asked him if he liked computers. To my surprise, not only did he enjoy programming, but he also owned an Atari 800 XL. I think I met my twin early in life. When he finally invited me over, I noticed that he also owned a disk drive and a monitor. It was the first time I realized how badly I wanted a better storage device. I was grateful to have a job and began saving for my own disk drive. Eventually, I purchased one a little later. Soon, I began piling up my collection with a lot of blank disks to write programs on and games for entertainment purposes. I began to get more serious about my programming and started trying all types of things from games, demos, utilities, and one time I even made a program to help me study for an English test. BASIC was fast becoming so addictive to me that I hardly spent any time playing video games or outside recreational activities. At least now, I was able to save and load my programs much faster since the disk drive was efficient. I would like to say that my parents were supportive, but they came from a different generation. My mother was hoping I would find some nice lady to hang out with, and my father was upset when he tripped over wires one day while walking into my room. I realize now I could have been more organized. They were still great parents and tried to adapt to my new hobby as best as they could. Remember that the world was different then, and many adults even considered video games a threat to learning and altering kids' thinking in a negative way. Yet I was determined to push forward despite the odds stacked against me. I knew what I wanted to do with my life finally and wasn't going to let anything stand in my way. My nephew soon took an interest in my passion for computers. Although Nintendo was starting to dominate the market at that time, they still had a curiosity about what made things work the way they did. I can't say they wanted to program, since it was not their hobby, but they gave me many ideas for programs. I even recall my older nephew on my Atari in this picture requesting a football game, so we put one together. My younger nephew really enjoyed the games on the Atari home computer. Much later, as my passion and skills increased in programming, I bought a book at the city mall called Mapping the Atari. I had no idea at the time how resourceful this book would become. It turned out to show me the internal workings of my computer system and how to write machine language programs in BASIC. The machine language programs allowed BASIC to execute routines faster since BASIC was limited on speed based on the task of compiling each time a program was run. I learned later that many of the arcade hits were written in this language, so I was determined to learn this strange language at all costs, even though it was sometimes impossible to track down errors in the logic. Once I began to work past creating machine language routines in BASIC, I started wanting to write larger programs. It was at that time I purchased my first machine language compiler. It was a cartridge released by OSS Precision Software called C64. It also turned out to be the most popular language cartridge of its generation and was used by professionals in the industry. I started writing simple graphic programs at first and moving sprites. Eventually, I moved on to more sophisticated programs such as vertical blank interrupts and collision detection. Listed below is a list of machine language opcodes. These are the commands that are accepted by Mac65 and other similar compilers. Notice also how they are repeated in some ways and only contain 3 characters for the first command. There is too much to cover about machine language for this slideshow, but I highly suggest grabbing a book on beginning machine language programming. You will soon discover just how powerful these commands are and how fast they can execute in cycles per second. That is what made machine language so powerful. It was much easier to get things running more quickly and create amazing games for its generation. I have included the program screenshot below so you can see how a typical machine language program may look in Atari BASIC. This one controls the device controls of the operating system. When used together, machine language commands can create storage locations, loops, input-output access, graphical screens, timer interrupts, and so much more. However, to be honest, machine language is not for the weary. It will take some time to grasp the nature of this simple but complex logic. I would personally suggest starting out small. Writing simple programs to store calculations and begin moving forward only when you're comfortable with each process in succession. If you're an intermediate machine language programmer, then reading through larger code segments will help you create better algorithms for your programs. After I graduated from high school, I began to think more seriously about programming. I began checking the local newspapers in search of a career. To my surprise, however, I learned that many jobs were requiring some kind of college degree. I guess that is what first inspired me to eventually get enrolled in college. Yet that would not happen until 10 years later. During this time, however, I continued to work on other jobs, such as in retail, but still remained true to my passion of programming computers. I set to work on creating a massive game in machine language. Although I was determined to finish it, other transitions would soon enter my life that opened my eyes to an entirely new computer with better graphics and sound. It was called the Commodore 64. My world would never be the same again as I left the innocence of my first experience on an Atari home computer in 1986. The Commodore 64 was also an 8-bit computer. However, it came included with a 3-channel synthesizer, 8 octaves, 4 waveforms, oscillator, synchronization, ring modulation, programmable filters, and so much more. It quickly became the fastest-selling computer of its generation. Due to its popularity, many manufacturers began writing games for this amazing system, and it was very attractive to musicians. Soon, Atari and other computers took a back seat as the Commodore 64 established its dominance in the industry, and its future began to look bright. That story is next. Hello guys, I want to thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope this was enjoyable to you. This was part 2 of my computer story, or my computer journey. And this basically just covers, my journey from the Atari to eventually discovering the Commodore 64. And what I'll be doing here is probably going to maybe a third video or possibly a fourth one. We'll just see kind of how it goes, play by ear and all that. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. And please like, favorite, subscribe this channel, and share with your friends as always. And definitely we're going to be getting into the Commodore 64 stuff, which you can see back here is my Commodore 64 system. And as we get into this more, I'm going to eventually be looking for people who are interested in writing machine language programs, or, maybe you're not experienced or whatever, but you just have some interest in it. Just let me know. I mean, if you've already kind of established some simple routines and kind of set yourself in the way, that's good enough. Hoping to find really good people that have really got a good grasp, maybe even people who worked in the industry. I would love to work with you. I already had one rejection by one guy, but I'm going to keep trying. That was on Twitter. And yeah, I'm looking forward to creating hopefully the next best game out there. Fine scrolling, rasters, sound. I'm saying game. That we're probably best to start with a simulation, as I mentioned, or a demo, and then eventually, hopefully, we can move on to a game from there. So yeah, so hope you guys enjoyed this, and yeah, share this video with your friends, and just let me know what your comments are. I'd like to hear your stories, and just have a great night. Thanks for watching.
In January 1982, the Commodore 64 personal computer was introduced with a 64K built-in memory for under $600. So to stay even with Commodore in memory and price, IBM will have to slash its price, quadruple its memory. Apple will also be faced with a sizable chore, and so will Atari. As Shearson American Express put it, the Commodore 64 could be the microcomputer industry's outstanding new product introduction since the birth of the industry.